At Fort Breckenridge, a sprawling U.S. military base tucked against the Oregon mountains, the hum of routine drowned out everything else, until it didn't. Staff bustled through clean halls, polished boots clicked in unison, and clipped orders filled the air. Yet through all the ceremony and order, one figure moved silently with a mop and bucket, her name never spoken with intention. Maria Lane, the janitor with thinning gray hair tied back in a no-nonsense knot, seemed like part of the background. Invisible. Until the day the general stopped mid-sentence, his voice catching, his face paling as her words shattered the illusion. Maria had been there for nearly a year. Nobody really remembered when she started. 1 week she simply was. She mopped the corridors before sunrise and wiped down the officers' lounge after midnight. She rarely smiled, never interrupted, and always wore the same faded blue overalls. To most, she was just the janitor. A necessary fixture in an otherwise spotless world. New recruits ignored her, seasoned officers stepped over her mop, and some even made jokes within earshot. None of it changed the calm, unreadable look in her eyes. Eyes that had seen more than any of them could imagine. Lieutenant Zach Cormack, fresh from the academy and full of opinions he had announced, often cracked jokes about floor polishers with attitude. One morning, spotting Maria scrubbing the mess hall floor, he nudged a colleague. Bet she can't spell strategy, let alone mop straight lines. His laughter echoed through the hall, drawing a few snickers. Maria didn't react. She simply wrung out her mop and kept moving, silent and still. But Colonel Jessup, seated nearby, glanced over his coffee with a furrowed brow. He said nothing, but made a note. The way Maria didn't flinch, that stuck with him. Maria's small studio off base was meticulously clean. Her bookshelves were sparse but multilingual, dictionaries, political memoirs, cultural treatises, each annotated in margins. She had no visible family, no photographs on the wall. But in a hidden drawer beneath her coffee table was a weathered leather pouch holding a dozen military badges, none of them American, and a handwritten letter in Arabic dated 12 years prior. Every morning, before her shift, Maria read that letter. It was not nostalgia. It was a warning. One she had never ignored. Her past was locked behind security clearances that no longer recognized her name. In a former life, Maria had been a high-value translator deployed undercover across multiple continents. From Kandahar to Sarajevo, her gift was not just in language, but in reading intentions. She'd negotiated truces while bombs fell, unspooled lies mid-sentence, and once talked a warlord down with only a sentence in perfect dialect. Then, without explanation, she vanished from intelligence rosters. Some said she'd died. Others whispered she'd gone rogue. The truth was simpler. Maria had walked away before she lost herself, and chose a life in the shadows, where nobody looked too hard. The tipping point arrived on a Thursday, under the buzzing lights of the East Wing conference room. A high-level NATO envoy was on base for routine strategy alignment, a seemingly unremarkable visit. Among the visitors was an elderly diplomat named Adrien Duval, a French-Algerian advisor known for his work on transnational intelligence. During the debrief, Duval clutched his chest and collapsed mid-sentence. Panic flared. Medics rushed in, but Duval's final words came out in urgent, slurred Tamashek, a language so obscure that even seasoned officers stood frozen. Then, from the hallway, a voice translated, clear, perfect, emotionless. It was Maria. Silence fell like a curtain. General Peterson turned sharply toward the doorway, eyes wide. Maria stood just outside, mop handle upright in her palm. His saying, "Don't let them in. The files are false." "Someone here lies," she translated, her tone precise. The medic blinked in shock. You understood that?" Maria nodded. "It's a dialect of Tamashek, Saharan variant. Very few speak it cleanly unless they've been embedded." The general took a step forward. "Who are you?" She looked him in the eye. "I'm the janitor. But that man just warned you of a threat no one else understood." Security rushed to contain the moment, ushering Duval out, but eyes remained on Maria. Suddenly the officers who once dismissed her began whispering behind stiff collars. General Peterson ordered her brought to his office for questioning. "Escort her," he snapped. But Maria didn't wait for guards. She walked calmly behind the general, her pace steady, her face unreadable. Inside the command office, Peterson threw down his folder. "I want answers. How did a janitor translate a tribal dialect better than any linguist in my intelligence division?" Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out a small laminated card. It read, "Clearance level expired, former tactical linguistics operative." Peterson stared, jaw tightening. "You're telling me you were intel?" Maria sat down, uninvited. I was Linguistic Intelligence Tier 3 under Joint Ops Division Echo. That was years ago. Now I clean floors and listen to people who think I'm deaf. The general's hand trembled as he pulled up a database. Sure enough, her name triggered a blacked-out file. "Why come back here?" he asked. "Because I heard chatter, uncoordinated dialect crossovers and encrypted comms. I knew someone was embedding false intel using language as a cloak. So I got close. The mop is camouflage." The general leaned back in stunned silence. "You expect me to believe a mop is your cover?" Maria's voice was flat. "People reveal the most when they think no one is listening. I've watched your men butcher 3 Arabic dialects and intercepted calls. I've seen intelligence reports mistranslated, placing our assets at risk. And now someone used Duval to deliver a hidden warning. I translated because no one else could." General Peterson rubbed his temples. "Why didn't you report sooner?" Maria's eyes narrowed. "Because you would have dismissed me. Just like everyone else does." That night, Peterson didn't sleep. He requested immediate access to Maria's sealed file, a request routed through 3 encrypted terminals and a high-clearance chain. When it arrived, it came with a warning: sensitive asset, deactivated, not disavowed. The file contained mission logs from Tripoli, Baku, and the Baha Valley. One incident stood out, Operation Nomad Echo, where Maria had defused an armed border standoff using only her voice and 9 fluid languages. Peterson leaned back in his chair, thunderstruck. "What the hell is a woman like that doing with a mop?" he muttered aloud. By morning, Maria was gone from the janitor's rotation. Her ID badge updated overnight, unlocking areas on base she'd never been seen entering before. Whispered rumors raced through the halls: "She's CIA. She's Ghost Division. No, she's the one from the Kandahar tapes." Meanwhile, inside a restricted ops room buried beneath the communications wing, Maria stood before a wall of decrypted intercepts. She highlighted phrases in Farsi, Pashto, Russian, and obscure Balkan slangs, each one pointing to a looming breach masked by translation errors. "They're counting on our ignorance," she told Peterson. "Language is the Trojan horse." A buzz echoed through the intelligence center. A recent satellite ping from a civilian tower revealed a suspicious transmission near the base perimeter. Maria zoomed in. "That's not civilian. That's military phrasing masked in trade dialect. And they're using old intel codes, ours." Peterson's stomach sank. "You're saying they're repurposing our own communication playbooks?" Maria nodded grimly. "And mispronunciation is their entry key. They want us to mistranslate our way into letting them walk through the front gate." A red alert triggered across the base. Silent lockdown protocols began. Officers scrambled to trace the embedded patterns Maria had uncovered. She worked non-stop for 12 hours, hopping between language logs, rerouting code phrasing in real time, patching linguistic errors that could have triggered live drone actions. A young pilot leaned in and whispered, "You were a janitor last week." Maria didn't pause. Titles don't matter when mistakes cost lives. Pronounce one vowel wrong in Arabic, and you just bombed a wedding instead of a weapons cache. Outside, General Peterson called an emergency meeting with NATO brass, briefing them on the breach. Some scoffed at the suggestion that mistranslation posed that higher risk, until Maria walked in. In front of the room, she played 3 back-to-back intercepts. Same conversation, 3 different dialect interpretations, each one painting a different target. "Now you tell me," she asked, "which one do you fire a missile at?" The room went dead quiet. "The problem isn't the enemy," she continued. "It's that we stopped listening long enough to think we understood." That day, the base began to see her. In the dim blue glow of the war room's projection screens, Maria worked through layers of intercepted chatter. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, isolating accents, dissecting phonetics, and tagging speech irregularities that had slipped through digital filters. She noticed something chilling, a repeated sequence of code words translated differently across languages, but always present. "This isn't random," she muttered. "They're planting a cipher inside mistranslations. Every misread phrase redirects us away from one place, our R&D bunker." She turned to Peterson. "They're not just spying. They're buying time for something worse." Peterson clenched his jaw. "Are we being prepped for sabotage?" Maria nodded. "Or worse, reverse tech theft. They may already be inside." That's when it hit him. Duval's collapse wasn't a coincidence. It was a trigger. He warned us because he knew what was coming. Peterson ordered a sweep of the R&D perimeter. Moments later, an undercover breach was discovered, thermal signatures traced to a cloaked drone relay station buried inside a delivery crate. It had been watching for weeks. The soldiers who found it didn't know what to make of the tech, but Maria did. Russian root OS. Iranian shell script. And it's transmitting. She didn't wait for authorization. Running back to the vault, she accessed the only remaining backup drone with manual override, an old Reaper from her active days. The system balked at her expired credentials until Peterson entered his override code. "You get one shot," he said. Maria smiled grimly. "One's all I need." With practiced hands, she aligned the Reaper's coordinates, filtered out decoy signatures, and launched it. The base shook slightly as the drone ascended, homing in on the rogue transmitter. Seconds later, a precision blast silenced it. No debris, no trail, just clean electromagnetic destruction. Applause erupted in the command center, but Maria didn't celebrate. She turned to Peterson, eyes sharp. "That was just one node. They're testing our vulnerability, and we passed barely." He exhaled, visibly shaken. "Then we need you full-time." Maria shook her head. "It's not about a title. It's about respecting fluency. The systems you trust? They only speak binary. Language lives in nuance. If we don't rebuild human listening into our intel chain, we'll be blind forever." Peterson nodded slowly. "Then you'll lead that rebuild." The following morning, the base cafeteria fell silent as Maria entered, not in overalls, but in a black flight suit with a silver badge that read, Linguistic Intelligence Command, Tier 1. Recruits nudged each other. Officers lowered their trays. Even Lieutenant Cormac, who once joked about her mopping skills, rose awkwardly and saluted. She passed him without a word. But later, he found her in the corridor and said softly, "I was wrong." Maria replied in flawless Mandarin, "Wisdom begins when pride ends." He didn't understand the words, but he understood the message. The quiet didn't last. 3 days later, during a routine cross-check of archived communications, Maria noticed something off. It was a simple training call between two logistics officers, but a stray verb conjugation in a French phrase sent chills down her spine. She ran the waveform through her phonetic scanner and found an anomaly. The accent was too clean, too practiced. No native English speaker should have gotten that right. She dove deeper, isolating more examples, each hidden in mundane conversations, all pointing to embedded agents speaking flawless languages not their own. "What am I looking at?" Peterson asked, staring at her matrix of color-coded voice logs. Maria zoomed in. "This isn't language drift. It's linguistic mimicry. Someone's running a shadow protocol inside our base, intercepting key messages and replacing them with fake translations. They're trying to confuse AI analysis tools and human interpreters alike." The general stiffened. "So they're manipulating meaning at the source?" She nodded. "Yes. And unless we trace every phrase manually, we'll walk into our own sabotage thinking we're following protocol." Peterson ordered a full linguistic sweep. Maria assembled a team of multilingual analysts, each one vetted and trained in phonetic irregularities. She personally restructured the base's AI language model, teaching it to recognize nuance rather than pattern repetition. Within 48 hours, her system flagged 5 more compromised message chains, one of which had authorized a test flight over classified airspace. This one, she told Peterson, would have sparked an international breach had it gone through. His face turned gray. They almost used our own words to start a war. At 3 a.m. the next night, Maria stood alone in the west corridor, the place she used to mop in silence. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window, no longer a janitor, not fully a soldier. Somewhere in between. Her face had aged with decisions made in shadows, her eyes heavy with languages most people would never hear. But she smiled slightly, knowing that for once, her silence had saved lives. A young private passed her, paused, and said, "I don't know what you are, but I hope you're on our side." She replied, "So do I." That morning, a new door was installed next to the secure intel chamber. On it, a plaque read, Linguistic Threat Analysis, Chief Officer, Maria Lane. Underneath it, in small engraved text, was her motto, Listen before you assume. Translate before you act. Recruits were now required to undergo a week of dialect training before clearance. Officers were issued updated phrase guides. Maria walked the halls, not to clean, but to teach, and to remind them that behind every silent figure might live a voice that speaks peace in 9 languages, or war in 10. 2 weeks later, a farewell event was held for General Orloff, a retiring Russian ally known for championing cooperative NATO projects. Dignitaries from across Europe gathered in Fort Breckinridge Ceremonial Hall. The speech was meant to be symbolic, gestures of goodwill, unity, closure. As Orlov began speaking in Russian, then shifted to French, and finally English, everyone clapped. Everyone but Maria. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. Something was wrong, not the words, but the pauses between them. She leaned forward in her seat, heart accelerating. "Stop the feed," she whispered to the aide beside her. Peterson, seated near the stage, noticed her urgency. Maria stood and walked briskly toward the command room. "What is it now?" he asked, following her. She replayed Orlov's speech, this time breaking it down syllable by syllable. "He embedded a number sequence," she said. "The pauses match a cadence used in Cold War-era code drops." Peterson blinked. He delivered a hidden message in his goodbye speech. She nodded. "It's not just a farewell, it's a trigger protocol for someone still inside this base." Emergency lockdown was issued again. Maria cross-referenced the speech rhythm against historic codebooks. The embedded message was simple but alarming: Phase 2 active. Asset 94 remain until confirmation. She pulled up base logs, searching for any operative marked 94. There was none. Until she realized, Asset 94 wasn't a person. It was a location. Building 94, an abandoned maintenance bunker on the edge of the airfield. "He's telling someone to wait there," she said. Peterson called for a tactical team. The team stormed Building 94 and found a makeshift comm station cloaked under rusted panels. Inside, a sat phone, encryption keys, and a miniature signal booster. They had caught it just in time. The device had been counting down to a scheduled pulse burst, which would have activated a sleeper relay in their drone network. Maria disarmed it herself, hands steady as ever. She looked at the command logs and exhaled slowly. If we'd missed this by 15 minutes, half our satellite guidance would have rerouted to foreign IP masks. They would have flown blind into their own traps. Peterson looked at her differently now, not just with admiration, but awe. "You hear threats where the rest of us hear pleasantries," he said. Maria shook her head. "Not threats. Patterns. Language isn't just communication. It's camouflage, code, culture, intention, all buried between syllables." He asked her then, not as a general, but as a man humbled by truth, "Why did you come back?" She looked him in the eye and answered, "Because the biggest threats don't march in boots, they slip through voices no one hears." Word of Maria's success spread beyond the base. Within days, a call came from Langley. The agency wanted a debrief, not just a report, but an in-person consultation. Peterson hesitated, knowing how they'd once buried her file without explanation. But Maria agreed. "If they want to listen now, they can. But on my terms." She arrived at the Virginia complex alone, wearing her updated badge and carrying a single slim folder. Inside were the linguistic breach diagrams, a list of mistranslation exploits, and a handwritten note: "Silence is never security." The debrief was sterile. A long glass room. 2 men and a woman, none of whom introduced themselves. "Why didn't you notify us of your findings sooner?" one asked, tone clipped. Maria folded her hands calmly. "Because last time I did, you sealed my file and told me to disappear." Another leaned forward. "We acted under policy. You went dark without protocol." She raised an eyebrow. "I was embedded in a region with shifting alliances, and I broke rank to save a convoy of school children. That's why you erased me. Because saving civilians isn't neat in the paperwork." They shifted in their seats. Maria continued, "While you filed me away, our enemies got smarter. They learned that a sentence misheard is just as deadly as a bullet. You were looking for soldiers in armor, not interpreters in janitor's suits." One of the agents cleared his throat. "What are you suggesting?" She stood, slid the folder toward them. "I'm suggesting you rebuild the way intelligence values language. Not as a formality, as a frontline defense. And you hire people who don't look like you expect, because those are the ones who go unnoticed. Until it's too late." No response came. But as she walked out, one of the agents followed her into the hall. "Lane," he said quietly. "That convoy you saved, my niece was on that bus." Maria turned. For a brief moment, her hardened features softened. "Then I suppose it wasn't a waste." He nodded once. "We were wrong to bury you." She shrugged. "You didn't bury me. You just gave me a different kind of cover." As she walked away, Her steps echoed down the marble corridor like punctuation in a sentence no one had dared finish, until now. Back at Fort Breckenridge, the base had changed. New recruits were taught not just how to fire and march, but how to listen. Every department had to pass linguistic threat simulations. And at the center of it all was Maria Lane, now Commander Lane, seated at a curved console built just for her. On the wall behind her hung a new emblem, a quill over a waveform, surrounded by 9 stars, each representing the languages she spoke fluently. Beneath it, engraved in steel, "Before war is declared, it is whispered." Maria's days were no longer quiet. She now led a team of linguistic analysts, each fluent in multiple dialects, each handpicked for their ability to listen between the lines. Among them was Private Eleni Brooks, a sharp-eyed black woman from Detroit who had grown up speaking English and Yoruba, and had taught herself Spanish just to interpret neighborhood stories for her grandmother. From day one, Eleni reminded Maria of a younger version of herself, quiet, observant, underestimated. But it wasn't until their first exercise that Maria saw something deeper, a gift for decoding tone, not just words. During a simulated intercept, Eleni flagged a phrase in a Turkish recording others had marked as irrelevant. "It sounds benign," she told the group, "but this cadence? It's only used in coded speech. My guess, it's a request for weapons, not a grocery list." Maria leaned forward. "What gave it away?" Eleni replied, "The way he paused after flour. No one says flour like that unless it means something else." Maria smiled faintly. "That's what saved a convoy once. You just heard what no one else would." As weeks passed, Eleni became Maria's shadow, following her into high-level briefings, decoding live intel, even handling cross-checks on multilingual drone protocols. But more than that, she began to ask questions. Why don't we teach nuance in boot camp? Why are dialects considered extra? Maria didn't answer right away. One day, she handed Eleni her old mop handle, the one she used to push through hallways, unseen. "Because sometimes, institutions only hear you after you clean up their mess," she said. Eleni took the handle reverently. "Then I guess we keep cleaning until they can't ignore us." One afternoon, during a surprise visit from NATO's Director of Intelligence, Maria brought Eleni to the presentation. The director frowned at the young woman's presence. "She's not cleared, is she?" he asked. Maria responded coolly, "She's more fluent in nuance than half your analysts. If she's not cleared, your system needs fixing." Eleni didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward and translated a real-time German-Russian intercept the AI couldn't process. The room fell silent. The director cleared his throat. "Point taken." Maria looked sideways at Eleni, her eyes gleaming with pride. A legacy wasn't a name, it was someone else learning to hear what you once heard alone. Later that evening, as they walked across the base together, Eleni asked, "Did it ever bother you? Being invisible for so long?" Maria paused, looking up at the evening sky. "It didn't bother me that they couldn't see me," she said slowly. "It bothered me that they didn't want to. Until they needed me. That's the lesson. Don't wait to be needed before speaking up. Know your worth even when they don't." Eleni nodded. "Then I'll speak up sooner." Maria chuckled. "Just make sure you do it in a language they don't expect. That way, they'll have to listen." The test came sooner than anyone expected. A distress signal pinged the base's satellite intercept hub, a voice transmission from a stranded NATO convoy near the Turkmen border. The audio was garbled, distorted by sandstorm interference, and mostly dismissed as unreadable by the automated systems. But Eleni, reviewing logs that night on rotation, caught something strange. A single phrase, spoken in Hausa, buried beneath static. Her ears sharpened. "This isn't a weather report," she whispered. "They're calling for help, but disguising it in tonal overlays." She sprinted through the corridor and woke Maria from a light sleep in the ops wing. "Commander Lane, you need to hear this." Together, they ran diagnostics, stripping the noise away layer by layer until the full message revealed itself. A trap team using an ancient coded system once taught in Nigerian border patrol units. "They're alive," Eleni breathed. "But their GPS is off by over 80 miles. They're sending false coordinates to throw off pursuers." Maria nodded slowly. "And no one but you would have caught it. Not bad for a night shift rookie." General Peterson was called at once. When he asked how Eleni cracked the intercept, Maria didn't answer. She let Eleni explain it herself, clear, confident, precise. By the time she finished, the general was already on the phone authorizing a rerouted extraction team. "We owe lives to your ears, Private," he said. "Keep using them. That night, Maria said nothing more. But after everyone left, she walked back to her old locker and taped a new nameplate beneath hers, Brooks, E. It gleamed silver, fresh. The legacy had begun. The rescued convoy arrived 2 days later. Their commander, eyes red with exhaustion, asked to meet the person who had saved them. When Eleni stepped forward, he blinked. "You're just a," but stopped himself. Eleni smiled. "Just what?" He swallowed. "Just someone we owe everything to." Maria watched from the back, her arms crossed. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of being the only one. She had company now, listeners in the making. Later that evening, Maria sat alone in the operations hub, staring at the muted footage of past missions, old recordings layered with dialects and warnings most never heard. She thought of all the voices lost in translation, all the peace buried beneath noise. She reached for a pen and scribbled a note across her desk calendar, trained them to hear the silences, not just the words. As the sun dipped below the mountains, she smiled. She was no longer just the janitor. She was the bridge. It had been nearly 15 years since Maria last stood at Langley's Central Hall, the place where her career had once silently ended. Now she returned not as a dismissed operative, but as a commander whose name was whispered with respect across global intelligence circles. Her heels echoed on the marble floors as she approached the auditorium for a keynote address she'd been invited to give. The room was filled with fresh recruits and aging officers, some who had signed off on her file's burial. She stepped to the podium, adjusted the mic, and looked out at the faces waiting to hear her speak. "I used to clean hallways," she began, her voice steady, "but I never stopped listening." A murmur rustled through the audience. She continued, "You're taught to identify threats through heat signatures, bullet casings, and enemy uniforms. But no one trained you to catch war in a sentence, hidden in cadence, in dialect, in the second syllable of a word you assumed meant nothing." She paused, letting the weight sink in. "I was buried in silence not because I was wrong, but because my method didn't come with boots and bravado. It came with quiet." She moved through her story, not as a plea for redemption, but as a map for their survival. She detailed how mistranslation nearly cost lives, how arrogance nearly let espionage walk through their front doors. "You think language is soft power. It's not. It's the first weapon drawn in any war. And sometimes, the most overlooked people carry the sharpest blades." By the time she finished, the room sat in reverent silence. Not applause, just stunned stillness. Then, slowly, one young recruit stood. Then another. Until the entire room rose to its feet. Afterward, a former director approached her in the hallway. "We should have listened back then," he admitted. She looked him square in the eye. "You still can," she said simply. He extended a hand, but she shook her head and walked away, not out of bitterness, but because forgiveness didn't require a handshake. It only required truth, and she'd finally spoken it. Outside, as she stepped into the morning light, her breath caught for a moment, not in grief, but in release. She had returned to the place that broke her and left it whole. Back at Breckenridge, a new plaque was installed near the central hall. It read, "In honor of Commander Maria Lane, who heard the storm before it spoke." And just beneath it, a series of etched translations of the same phrase in 9 languages, each one Maria had once used to stop a war, prevent a breach, or save a life. When Eleni read the plaque aloud in Yoruba, Maria's hand touched her shoulder. "Never let them forget the power of what they can't hear," she said softly. Eleni smiled. "I won't." Months passed, and with each passing day, Maria stepped further from center stage. She no longer felt the need to monitor every log or triple-check every phrase. Eleni had grown into the role with a precision that even Maria hadn't anticipated. The new recruits now looked to Eleni the way Eleni once looked at her. The hallway glances, the subtle nods, they weren't about rank anymore. They were about trust. Maria began taking her coffee a little slower. She started attending less, delegating more. And for the first time in years, she began thinking about life after duty. One morning, Eleni found Maria sitting on the base bench outside the comms tower, arms crossed, watching the sunrise. "You thinking of leaving?" Eleni asked. Maria didn't answer right away. "I'm thinking of not being needed anymore," she replied, a quiet satisfaction in her tone. Eleni sat beside her. "You're needed. Just not in the same way." Maria nodded. "Exactly. And that's the point. If I've done my job right, I disappear again, but this time by choice, and this time, into peace, not silence." A week later, Maria submitted her final report. Not a resignation, not a retirement. A declaration of readiness to step back. Her position would remain open, not to be filled by rank or seniority, but by demonstration. Peterson accepted the document with a simple gesture, a hand over his heart. "You changed this base," he said. "No, sir," she replied. "I reminded it how to listen." As she exited the office, she didn't look back. The halls were no longer foreign to her. They were fluent. Her departure was quiet, exactly how she wanted it. No ceremony. No folded flags. Just one final walk through the hall she once scrubbed. As she reached the exit, she passed a new recruit mopping the floor. The girl paused, a little embarrassed. "Sorry," she said, stepping aside. Maria smiled and replied in perfect Tagalog, "Don't apologize. Some of the best warriors start with a mop in their hand." The girl blinked, unsure of what she just heard, but nodded anyway. Maria kept walking, into the rising light, no longer a shadow, no longer unseen. Back in her small apartment on the edge of town, Maria opened a weathered notebook. Inside were phrases she'd collected over the years, notes in Farsi, French, Pashto, Mandarin. She added one final sentence at the bottom, in English. "When they finally heard me, the world got quieter. Not because I stopped speaking, but because someone else finally started listening." She closed the book, set it on the shelf, and brewed herself a cup of tea. Outside, the world moved on, loud, busy, unaware. But within it now lived one less hidden voice, and many more ready to rise. A month later, a letter arrived at Maria's door, handwritten, with military seal. Inside was a note from Eleni: "We decoded a scrambled relay using tonal patterning, something you taught us. The breach was real. And we caught it in time. You're not here, but your voice still is." Maria read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it beside her old clearance badge. Her work had become a legacy, carried forward not by protocol, but by the precision of those who had once been overlooked, just like she had. One morning, Maria attended a language symposium at a nearby university, incognito, seated in the back, just to listen. She watched a young black professor speak passionately about linguistic warfare and how overlooked dialects have shaped global conflicts. "Every syllable holds weight," the speaker said. "And those who listen closely can stop wars before they start." Maria smiled faintly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her influence was already in the room, carried by others who now knew how to listen. As she walked through the campus courtyard afterward, a group of students passed her, laughing and chattering in Swahili, Urdu, and Spanish, fluid, unafraid. For the first time in a long time, Maria felt something unfamiliar in her chest, relief. Not because the world had changed entirely, but because someone was changing it. One phrase, one voice, one language at a time. She pulled her scarf tighter against the breeze, turned down a quiet street, and disappeared into the crowd, not forgotten, just finally heard. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that greatness often hides in silence and that listening can be the most powerful act of all, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. Let's keep honoring the unseen, the unheard, and the unstoppable. Subscribe now, and never miss the voice that could change everything.